I led them with cords of kindness, with the bands of love. And I became to them as one who eases the yoke on their jaws, and I bent down to them and fed them.
Shalom, shalom. Once again, it's Brother Tyndall coming in. Gonna do a read-along update and hopefully give you something to chew on. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to start off by asking a question. Do you suffer from a blind heart? Now, as you think on that, which I'll come back to after I do the update. For those of you who know, and for those of you who are new to the channel, I say thanks for subscribing. For those who are new, I usually do an update, and it'll make sense once I start doing this. And then afterwards, I give a word of encouragement, a teaching, a word of study, something to that effect at the end of the video. Now, go ahead and tell you, today, I'm going to try to make this as brief as I can, but I am going to cover a lot of scripture, and I'm going to put a lot of information out there. So for those of you who take notes, you might want to pause it and get something, a piece of paper and a pencil or something like that. I'm going to put most of it on the screen so you'll be able to see it, but, you take notes, you can go study this, go test it for yourself, like Paul says. But anyway, with that said, let's get straight into the update. Okay, last week, the winner was the book of Ezra. That's been completed. Wednesday, I think, is when I put it. I finished it all on Tuesday, and I uploaded them all on Wednesday. So that read-along playlist is now on the YouTube channel. And as always, it will be in the link to the full playlist will be in the description of this video below, along with all the other read-along playlist YouTube links. And yeah, there we go. Okay, the vote last week on the table was between Nehemiah and Zechariah, and Zechariah won by one vote. So between now and next week, y'all willing, I will get all those read-along videos made and uploaded to YouTube in a playlist. Give me just a second. Let me look. I don't think Zechariah has many chapters. What is it, like 14 chapters, something like that? Yeah, Zechariah, here we go. 14 chapters, yeah. So it won't take me long to do them. I'll just have to sit down and actually do them. Once I get them made, most likely the next day, I'll sit down in one session and I'll upload them back to back to back to back like I usually do. Okay, there's that. Okay, now for the vote this week, I'm gonna say this. Not gonna say any names, but there's always a few people that watch these videos and then they either choose not to vote, hey, and I understand, or they forget to vote because at the end of the video, the last half, or I ain't gonna say last half, but the latter part of the video when I do the teaching, they forget to vote. So right now, before you forget, go and comment vote in the comment section below right now. Just pause the video, go down there and type out which one you want to vote for. Like I said, Nehemiah or Amos, that's the vote this week. Nehemiah or the book of Amos. Whichever one you want me to make next, that's the vote this week. Nehemiah or Amos. Just pause the video, go down there, type in your vote. That way you don't forget. And there's more than one. There's not just one person. So if you're sitting there going, "Man, he's calling me out," no, there's more than one person that does this. Now, like I said, some people just may choose not to vote. Hey, that's fine. But I know there are a few that forget to vote. So that's why I'm emphasizing that. Just vote. Okay, now, Yeah, that's that. Okay, now for this teaching, I guess we would call this. I just want to go through some scriptures. Like I said, it's going to be, I'm going to read a lot of scriptures and just kind of comment here and there and point out some things. And, like I say, hopefully give you something to chew on. Like I said, do you suffer from a blind heart? Okay, now, with that said, let me pull this back up. We're going to go to Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 17. I'm going to read down to about verse 24. And there's one section that I'm gonna key in on, but I'm gonna read all this so we can see it. Okay, so let's just go to the text. This is the King James version I'm gonna read out of right here. All right, so let's bring this up. Okay, is that working? Yeah. Okay. Let me scroll. Wait a minute. Let me scroll up. There we go. Ephesians 4:17. He says this from the King James. It says, "This I say therefore, and testify in the Master," or the Lord, "that ye henceforth walk not as other Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind." Some translations say the futility of their mind. That word vanity here, let's just look it up. I will see. This is, like I said, they'll point out a couple things here and there. Vanity, strong. Here we go, right here. Strong's number G3153. Vanity. But see how it says up there, it comes from G3152. So let's look at that one. Give me a second to bring this up. Hang on just a second. Go up here to the dictionary. That's the word it comes from. You notice it says from the base of empty, profitless, or an idol, vain, or vanity. Basically, it has the meaning of empty, worthless, vain, futile, right? Okay, now what he's talking about here, let's go back to the text, back to the King James with all the numbers. What he's talking about is worthless thinking, empty thinking. Okay, now we'll see that as we keep reading, and in the last verse I get to, but I just wanted to point that out. Okay, verse 18, it says, "Having the understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of Elohim through the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart." And hence why I asked the question, do you suffer from a blind heart? Now that's the verse I'm going to key in on. But let's just keep reading down through the rest of this passage down to, I think it's verse 24. Okay, verse 19, it says, "Who being past feeling have given themselves over unto lasciviousness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. But ye have not learned so Christ," or Messiah. "If so, be that ye have heard him and have been taught by him as the truth in Yeshua." Verse 22, "That ye put off concerning the former conversation." Now, for those who don't know, that word does not mean conversation as in the way you talk. Some people, that throws them off. That's like a King Jamesism. That's the way they used that term back then. But what it means is the way you walk, your daily walk in your life, your former way of life, basically. That you put off concerning the former conversation, the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts. Now, right here, these two verses too, I'm going to point out something. "And be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which after Elohim is created in righteousness and true holiness." True holiness. In righteousness and true holiness. Not going to go down that road today, but maybe that's a study. Go find out what righteousness and true holiness actually is, what it points back to. But anyway, you see how up here, let's scroll back up. Verse 17 right here, it says, in the vanity of their minds. It's talking about the way you think. He's saying that you have an incorrect thought pattern. The way your perspective on things is incorrect. It's empty. It's worthless. It's vain. Right? And like I said, down here in verse 23, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. That sounds awfully familiar to something else he wrote in Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. Okay, well, let's just go look at that and see what it says. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And many of us can quote this off the top of our heads. It says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of Elohim, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy, there's that word again, acceptable unto Elohim, which is your reasonable service. And this next verse, verse 2, it's chock full of so much information. Define these words. I suggest going through and defining some of these words. Look in the Strong's Concordance and see what some of these words mean. And that's a whole study in and of itself right there. But let's read this verse. It says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of Elohim. I'll put it simply. I'll explain this verse simply. Do not be conformed to this world, as in the way the world thinks. But be ye transformed. You see the Greek definition, metamorpho. It's where we get our English word metamorphose, as in a butterfly, or as in a caterpillar going into a cocoon and metamorphosing into a beautiful butterfly. We understand that? Okay, now let's look at this next word. It says, by the renewing of your mind. You see how that word renewing? Now, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. But you see, it says renovation, renewing. Right? So we're to metamorphose from our old self and the way we thinking like the world does. We're to be metamorphosed into something new by renewing our mind, by renovating our mind, if you will. Does that make sense? Okay, now I'm going to ask a question. If, let's just say, you're doing renovations in your house, in, let's say, the kitchen. You're going to renovate the entire kitchen. You know, my wife, she watches a lot of these house flipping shows where they'll go in and they'll buy some old beat down, run down house and they'll renovate the entire house and then they'll turn around and sell it. Or it'll be one of these shows where, you know, these people want to sell their house and the realtors and the home decorating people come in and look at it and go, well, you know, if we updated this and this and we renovated this and this, it might sell better. And, you know, it shows them going through this whole process, right? Okay. So here's your analogy. Say you're going to renovate your kitchen. What's the first thing you do? You take out all the old stuff. First off, you're going to get all the appliances, the stove and the refrigerator. You're going to get them out of the way. Most likely, you're going to get newer appliances, okay? But we get those out of the way. The next thing you got to do, you got to take out all the old cabinets, the countertops, the flooring, all that stuff, the sink, the faucet, all that stuff. You take it out before you put in something new. And therein lies a lot of people's problem, I think. So let me ask you this question. If you're one person and you're taking all this stuff out, Let's say you rip up all the flooring and you take out all them pieces of tile or, hardwood floor, whatever it is you got. You take up all them pieces and you're running it out the back door of your house, throwing it in the big trash pile or, one of them construction dumpsters people are in. It doesn't matter. But you're piling it up to get rid of it later. But you're getting it out of the house, right? Then you got to go in there and you got to rip out the cabinets. And you break them all down, and you take all that out. You take out the countertop, the old sink, and all this stuff, and you're one person taking all that out the back door. Okay, let's say there's 5 people standing out there in the backyard just waiting. And as soon as you come out there and you drop something off in this trash pile that you're going to get rid of, one of those 5 people pick it up, and they run around to the front of the house, go in the front of the door, and they drop it back in the kitchen. So as fast as you can take it out, there's 5 people out there waiting to bring it right back into where what you're trying to get it out of. So my question is, if that's the case, do you think you're ever going to get rid of all that old stuff? No, because you can't take it out as fast as everybody else is bringing it in. Okay, now, there's your analogy. Now let's show you the spiritual truth of that. Sitting down for 1 or 2 hours in a congregation reading the Bible, listening to somebody preach or teach to you for 1 or 2 hours a week, in no way is going to, how do we say, counteract all the mess that comes into your mind. Look at it this way. The media, the books, the music, the television, the movies, all this stuff that we bombard ourselves with in a week is all the trash coming in. And us studying that Bible is the new stuff. The newly renovated cabinets and all that stuff coming in. So until we limit all that stuff coming in, it's like, you're trying to put a Band-Aid on a broken arm. Does that make sense? Most people, they never go, like it says, metamorphosis. A suggestion. Perhaps we should go into a cocoon. I've taught on this before. Back when I was in the homeless shelter, this is what I would try to get the men to understand. That they come into this facility and they want to change, but they don't realize how to go about the change. They keep doing the same stuff they've been doing. Same television shows, same books, same all that stuff. And hey, we're just as guilty. We allow all this stuff to influence us. And then we think, well, maybe, me reading my Bible 15 minutes a day or an hour or 2 when I go to congregation or whatever. You see what I'm saying? Cocoon effect. You got to go into the cocoon. And what's a cocoon do? It shuts out all the rest of the world. It limits all that trash that is coming through your eye gate and your ear gate and all that. And you limit all that. And you simply begin to feed on the word. You're starving the flesh, but yet feeding the spirit. If you starve that flesh, it will dwindle and die. And you feed the spirit, it will grow. Does that make sense? I know, kind of went off on a tangent with that. But there you go. But let's go back to Romans. Now, I'm telling you, how to do this, so to speak. The practical application of the cocoon effect. Does that make sense? That's what I've always called this passage, is the cocoon effect. You got to put yourself into a cocoon and limit the intake of certain things and increase the intake of other things. Makes sense? Okay. Let's go back to the Ephesians passage. Let me bring this back up. Like it says, in the vanity of their minds. That's what that was a tangent of these verses. Verse 23 it says, Ephesians 4, verse 23 and 24, it says, to be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which after Elohim is created in righteousness and holiness. You see what I'm saying? In order to be renewed in your mind, you got to stop taking in all this trash. We'll just call it what it is, trash, and increase your intake of the Word. Okay, but if we go back up here, this is where I ultimately want to go with this. Right here, verse 18. Okay, but let's read 17 and 18 once again. It says, this I say therefore, and testify in the Master, that ye henceforth walk not after other Gentiles walk. Walk not as other Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind. And the next verse, he explains why their mind, their thought patterns are worthless or vain or empty, right? He says, having the understanding darkened. Now, let's look at something right here. I know in the original Greek manuscripts there were no commas, but in the English they put commas here. Now I went and looked at other translations, and these commas, these two commas in this sentence, most often they're in this exact same place here. But sometimes I want to say it's this second comma that has been moved. But it doesn't matter. But just look at this for a second. You could read this like this. Look at it. It says, having the understanding darkened because of the blindness of their heart, being alienated from the life of Elohim through the ignorance that is in them. Do we see that? Now here's what I want to point out. This is something I want to point out. We notice that having our understanding darkened is because of the blindness of our heart. Blindness of the heart is the cause, and the darkened understanding is the effect. We see that. Same too in this inserted phrase in the middle of the sentence. Being alienated from a life of Elohim through the ignorance that is in them. The ignorance is causing the alienation. Do we see what I'm pointing out here? But ultimately, our hearts are blind, which leads to a darkened understanding. Why? Because we're ignorant. Ignorant meaning we do not know. Not that we do not have the ability to know. There's a difference between ignorance and stupidity, if you will. Ignorance means you simply don't know. But think about this. Here's the ultimate question. See if I can put this into words so that it'll make sense. We understand things incorrectly. Our understanding is darkened. Why? Because of the blindness of our heart. And we're alienated because of our ignorance. Okay, now, what causes the ignorance? Because we don't know, right? But why don't we know? Because our hearts, the blindness of our hearts. Now, let's look up this word blindness and see what it says. That's the key, because the way this is written here, I read a whole bunch of commentary and they say all kind of different things, but the way I read this is blindness of the heart is the ultimate cause for all this stuff listed. Darkened understanding, alienated, ignorance. We see that? because the blindness of their or our hearts. We'll include all of us in this because this applies to all of us because of the blindness of our heart, right? But let's look that word blindness up and see what it says. Okay, let's go back to it so you can see this. This word right here, blindness. Let's see what it says. Pull up, we'll scroll back down. Okay, right here. Blindness. Strong's number G4457. Now, I'm not talking about stupidity. I ain't calling anybody stupid. That's not the point of this. Look at the very last definition. It says hardness. Callous. Now, for those who've read the entire Bible, there should be all kind of scriptures from the Tanakh, the Old Testament, popping into your head. The Ruach should be reminding you of all these scriptures you've read in the Old Testament about hard heart, stiff neck. There's one, I think it's in Psalms, it talks about what does it say? Hey, somebody knows the scripture because I remember, and I'm not going to quote this because I can't. But I want to say it's in the Psalms, but it talks about a fat heart, like goose's fat or something like that. And the idea that the psalmist is trying to convey is that your heart has been encased in this layer of fat, and nothing can get through it to penetrate it. It's the same idea as a hard heart, or as the New Testament, like it said, hardness. Okay, but if somebody can think of that scripture, hey, put that in the comments. I'll go, when I'm done with the video, I'll go look that one up. But Ruach brought that one to my mind, but I don't remember exactly where it is. But anyway, the point is this. Because we have a hard heart. And like I said, Ruach should probably bring into your remembrance all these verses you've read in the Tanakh about a hard heart, a stiff neck, like I said, callous. Man, all these places where that concept is mentioned. Now I'm going to go look at one. And we're going to read through that. I'm making this to connect back to something in the actual Torah itself. If we flip back to Deuteronomy chapter 10, let's read that. And this is one of my favorite passages. Let me pull this one up on the screen. Let me get to it, and then we'll look at that. We're going to start at Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 12. Okay. All right, let me bring this up on the screen. Now I'm gonna bring this up. I'm gonna bring this up in the Scripture Version 2009 simply because there's all kind of cross references. That's one of the reasons I like using this Bible, because it'll show you it's got cross references in it. I'll just leave it that way. You read something and it'll cross reference something else in the Tanakh, sometimes in the Brit, the New Testament, and that other quote unquote mainstream translations don't reference or they don't cite. Does that make sense? I'll put it that way. Okay, but let's look at this. Deuteronomy chapter 12 or chapter 10, starting at verse 12 from the Scripture 2009. I'm going to read this. And like I say, just some brief things here. And remember, the whole thing is, do we suffer from a blind heart, right? That's the concept we're going with. That's the subject we're dealing with here. Okay, but if we start at verse 12, it says, and now Israel. What is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim, asking of you? Okay, let's stop right there. And let's point out two things. First of all, notice it does not say, and now Jews. What is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim, asking of you? It doesn't say Jews. It says Israel. Okay? Now, for those who do not know, there is a difference between Israel and the Jews. I'll briefly explain this. Please, by all means, go look in the scriptures and they bear this out. The Jews are one of the 12 tribes of Israel. The Torah, the law of the Most High, was not given to the Jews. It was given for all Israel, that would be all 12 tribes, to obey. So this mindset people have of that was for the Jews is incorrect. In fact, if you look through the first 5 books, which is considered the Torah or the law of the Most High, the instructions, the first 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy, do a word search for the word Jew and the word Jews with an S. And guess what? You will not find either one of those words anywhere in the Torah, Genesis to Deuteronomy. It's not there. So to say that was only for the Jews is a misnomer. It is a misunderstanding that whether you were taught or you have simply come to believe, but that's not true. The text says that the Torah was given to Israel, meaning all 12 tribes. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is somebody will say, well, that was Israel, and I'm not Israel. We'll deal with that one too. In fact, if you're a believer in Messiah, you are Israel. You have been grafted into Israel. That can be seen in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 11, 12, and 13. It says, you were not part of the commonwealth of Israel, but now because of Messiah, you are. And in Romans 11, Paul, starting at verse 13, he says, I speak to you who are Gentiles. And in verse 11, he says, you being a wild olive branch, were grafted into the cultivated olive tree. And that cultivated olive tree he is speaking of is Israel. He's taking his analogy of an olive tree from Jeremiah 11, verses 16 and 17. So this mindset that, well, I'm in the church and the Israel back there, that's two separate things. No, that's called replacement theology, and that is false also. Believers are grafted into Israel. And therefore, all this stuff in the law, in the instructions, in the Torah apply to them. I don't care if you're a Jew, a Gentile, one of the lost sheep of the house of Israel, one-horned, one-eyed, purple people eater. If you believe in Messiah, you're grafted into Israel, and all this stuff applies. That's the teaching for the other day. You got a question, please ask. I'll bear it out in Scripture because it's there. But don't let the hardness of your heart reject what I'm trying to teach you, because that's ultimately where we're going with this. Do you suffer from a blind heart? Okay, so all this, what I'm about to read right here, actually applies to any and all believers because we're grafted into Israel. Now let's read this and see what this says. Okay, let's bring it back up. Deuteronomy chapter 10, starting at verse 12 in the Scripture 2009 version. It says, and now Israel, What is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim, asking of you? But to fear Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim, with all your heart and with all your being. Verse 13, to guard the commands of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and his laws, which I command you today for your good. Notice that. It says to guard. I'll get to this word here in just a second. The commands of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and his laws, which I command you today for your good. Do we see what that's saying there? His commands and his laws are for our good. We'll put it in an analogy that most people can understand. I know people say, well, we don't have to do that. All these kind of excuses. Well, is that because your heart's blind? Is your heart hard? Maybe that's why we don't have to do that. That's for the Jews. Maybe that stems from a blind heart. Your obstinate disobedience stems from your hard heart. Do we see that? But you see how it says commands and laws are for our good. Anybody ever, with their child, they sit down with their child and the child doesn't understand why you tell them do this or don't do that. The child doesn't understand it, but you simply explain it to him. Just trust me and obey me. It sounds familiar. Or you say, just trust me, it's for your own good. Because that's the best way you could explain it to their mind that can't grasp the complex concept of all of the rules and why and this and that. You just simply, it's for your good. Isn't that the same thing that the Most High is saying right here? To guard the commands and laws because they're for your good. But that's not for me. That's for the Jews. That's the Old Testament stuff. That's all those things are false ideologies, empty thoughts because of a hard heart. That's causing you not to actually obey, to be renewed in your thinking. Do we see that? Now let's just look at something here. I'm gonna show you something. Let me pull this back up and I'm gonna show you something here. I've spoke on this before. Right here, this word guard. I said I'd come back to this. It says to guard. Okay, let's look at that in the King James and just see how it's worded. You see here it says guard. But in the King James, that same word here, let me highlight that verse. That same word, see right here, it says to keep. Okay, now, in your mind, keep and guard have two different meanings. In the English, forget the text for right now. Just think about this. In your mind, keep and guard are two different words, obviously, but they have two different meanings when we read that. English people read that. I'll explain this briefly. Keep has the mindset. We read that word keep and it brings up the connotation of a strict obedience. I've got to obey, I've got to obey, I've got to obey. right? Guard doesn't bring up that harsh, overbearing, strict obedience concept. It brings up the idea of, now don't misunderstand me. I say this all the time. Do not misunderstand me. I am not saying we do not have to obey the law. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is this word in the Hebrew does not mean a strict obedience of the law. That's not what it means. It means to guard, as in to hold the Torah, the instructions of the Most High, in the correct perspective in our heart, in our lives. We are to understand I am supposed to obey these things. Whether I understand why they're given to me, but he just said it's for our good. Trusting. I am to hold these in the correct perspective. I am to guard these. Now, does that mean I'm always going to, quote unquote, keep them? No. We most likely will not keep everything. But we're to understand we are supposed to. And therefore, when we don't and we sin, transgressing the law, 1 John 3:4, we are to have remorse and we are to make it right again. But if you have a hard heart, you can't do that. Your hard heart's going to cause you not to want to obey them anyway and come up with all these numerous excuses and false teachings and false doctrines and false beliefs that have been handed down through generation to generation and passed to us, that we say, well, I don't have to do that. I'm in the new covenant. That's for the Jews. I'm not part of Israel. The law was nailed to the cross. All these things that are false that stem from a hard heart. Do we get all that? Okay, now let's go back to the text. Let me show you this first off, okay? I'm going to show you this word. This is the King James, like I said, to keep. And in our minds, we see that, and it's all through the King James. It says keep, 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 keep. And to us, we think that's a strict obedience. That's not what the word in Hebrew means. Let's actually look it up, shall we? I've talked about this before. Bring up the Strong's Concordance. It says to keep. You notice it says Strong's H8104. I'm going to bring this up like this, and I'm going to go to the dictionary so we can see it. I've even got this highlighted. Properly, to hedge about as with thorns. That is, guard, generally to protect, attend. Beware, be circumspect, take heed, keep. But you see how it says guard. Observe, preserve, regard. The word has more of a, like I said, to hold, to guard them, to understand, to give them the right perspective in your life, in your heart, to understand that I am supposed to obey these things. And if you by sheer implication, if you guard them, if you hold them in the right perspective, then the natural outflowing is you keeping or obeying them. But you've got to start with understanding I'm supposed to obey them. Does that make sense? But you can only do that if your heart is not blind or hard. Okay, let's go back to the text. I've kind of harped on that enough. Let's go back and look at this. Let me bring it back up in the Scripture Version 2009. Okay. It says, to guard the commands of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and his laws, which I command you today for your good. Okay. Now, I'm going to just simply read through these verses to get down to the one I want to talk about. Verse 14, Deuteronomy 10:14, Scripture 2009. See, the heavens and the heaven of heavens belong to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your Elohim. Also the earth, which all that is in it. Verse 15, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh delighted only in your fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, you above all peoples. Now, I've talked about this before, this concept right here. above all peoples. You see how it gives reference. Deuteronomy 7:6, Deuteronomy 14:2, Deuteronomy 26:18. It says Deuteronomy 6:7, for you are set apart people to Yahweh the head of Elohim. Your Elohim had chosen you to be a people for himself, a treasured possession. That goes back to that video I talked about, being a weirdo. Peculiar people. In the New Testament, when Paul uses that term, we are a peculiar people, that is going directly back to this phrase. You are above all people, a treasured possession, a people his very own. All this language you see in the Old Testament where it says that, that's what Paul is referring back to. Go look. You want to see the video? It's a read-along update. I forget what day it's from. A month and a half ago. I forget the date on it, but if you can most likely type in and you can find being a weirdo, and in parentheses, peculiar person, a peculiar people, something to that effect. And I break that down and I show you. That's what Paul's talking about. Makes sense? Okay, let's just keep reading here because I know this is getting long. I want to wrap this up. But Deuteronomy 10:16, let's look at this one. It says, and you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart and harden your neck no more. I think, let's look at the King James on that one. Let's just see how it says. Deuteronomy 10:16 from the King James, right there. It says, circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart and be no more stiff-necked. Same concept as blindness of the heart, right? And for those of you who out there who may not know and think that, well, in the Old Testament, it was circumcising the foreskin, physical act of circumcision, snipping the tip, if you will. Yes, I said that. And they say, well, that was in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, it's about circumcising your heart. And they think that's a New Testament concept. Circumcising your heart is not a New Testament concept. It's right here in Deuteronomy 10:16. Circumcise, therefore, the foreskin of your heart. We see that. Perhaps you were one of these that thought that circumcision of the heart was only a New Testament concept. That come about in the New Testament. The Old Testament was about physical circumcision. The New Testament's about circumcising your heart. Maybe that's what you believed. Maybe you believed that because of the hardness of your heart, or because you had a stiff neck. Do you see what I'm saying? Anyway, because, hey, I throw myself into this. I used to believe a lot of this stuff until I actually, let me pull my face up. Hey, I'm not trying to call anybody out by any means. I'm not trying to call you out. But I know I used to believe a lot of these fallacies that I'm pointing out, I used to believe them. Until I actually started reading and studying the scripture and trying to connect the Brit Chadashah, the New Testament, back to the Old Testament. Because a lot of us know, I ain't going to say all of us know, but a lot of us understand that the New Testament, there's not really anything new in it. It's simply a commentary of what's in the Old Testament. An explaining of what's in the Old Testament, what's in the Tanakh. A lot of people don't realize that. They think it's something new. Most of what's in the New Testament has its foundations. I say most. Pretty much all of what's in the New Testament has its foundation back in the Old Testament. But most people never actually sit and try to make the connection. They don't. They stay to the right side of the book. They never go to the left side of the book. Oh, we can't read the front of the book. We got to unhitch ourselves from that. Well, I seen a picture somebody shared, and hey, I agree with it. I'll show you something. They showed a picture, 2 pictures side by side. Let me pull this up They showed a picture. This is what they did. side by side. It was two separate pictures of this. Here, let me pull it up so you can actually see this. Hang on. You see this side over here? You see how it's thicker than the other side? Yeah, that's the Old Testament. But most people don't read that. They want to read that. That's the Old Testament. Most people don't read that. They read the New Testament on this side. Oh, maybe we ought to start reading that Old Testament more. That way, we begin to make connection between what's in the Old Testament and gaining a deeper and fuller understanding and connecting it to the New Testament and what those people were talking about, what they were writing about, and the concepts they were dealing with. Does that make sense? But let's go back. I'm almost done. Let's go back to this passage, and I'm going to be done with this. If we go back to Deuteronomy up here, okay? I got a picture. I'll say this. We go back up to verse 12. I'll say this. I got a meme, a picture or whatever I made. And it says this. It says, now Israel, what doth the... This is King James. I'm going to bring it back up. It says, and now Israel, what is Yod-Heh-Vav-He your Elohim asking of you? Okay? And notice this. It's like 5 things in these 2 verses. But to fear, to walk, to love, to serve, and verse 13, to guard. Fear, walk, love, serve, guard. You say that? Fear, walk, love, serve, guard. What is it the Most High is asking of us? To fear, to walk, to love, to serve, and to guard. To fear Him, walk in His ways. What are His ways? The Torah, the instructions, the law, if you will. To love Him, well, how do we love Him? By walking in His ways. To serve Yahweh, our Elohim. And to guard the commands. We see that? But anyway, I just throw that one out there. But you see how all this stuff is talking about fear, love. To love Him, to serve Him, to guard His laws and His commands. But in order to do that, it says, and you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart and harden your neck no more. See, in order for us to do all this stuff, to obey His commands and His laws and to fear Him and to love Him and to serve Him and all, in order for us to do this, we have to circumcise our heart and be no more stiff-necked. We have to not have a blind heart. I see it. I see this quite often. When I begin to talk to somebody who thinks law's done away with, nailed to the cross, that's for the Jews, I don't have to do it, that's not for me, blah, 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 and you start trying to explain to them what the scriptures are actually saying, hard heart, pride of their flesh. They have a stiff neck, they're hard-hearted, and they will not and do not listen. Now, then you have those that who understand we should be obeying this, and you sit and you talk with them, and there's some things they just don't get. And they got a hard heart. But like I said, I include myself in this. I mean, this is something that it took me a while because I grew up believing all this false stuff. And it took me, to strip. And I guarantee you there's still stuff probably the way I believe about certain things is wrong. And I'm ignorant about it. Why? Because my heart's hard. And I can't see it. I'm blind because of my heart. But it's like I say, I'll end like this. When somebody comes with something and it doesn't line up with what you believe, don't have a knee-jerk reaction and reject it outright. Actually listen to what they're saying. Listen with the intent of understanding as opposed to listening with the intent of questioning, arguing, and, trying to prove yourself right. Why? That's another thing. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. And so many, that comes from the flesh. People get into this and they want to be right. I could care less who's right or wrong. I want the truth to come out, the truth to go forth. See, that's what our flesh, our hard hearts, our flesh doesn't let us understand that. Two people, they start discussing the topic, and the flesh in them, that both people want to be right. Neither one wants to admit they're wrong, and they're discussing. It comes into an argument. It's like two little flames. Eventually, the flames get so high that both people get burned, and everybody around them gets burned. And what they fail to realize is that I don't care what either one of them's teaching, they're both wrong. Why? Because they're in their flesh. Do we see that? It's because you have a hard heart. My point is this: when somebody comes to you, or you see somebody shares something with you, or whatever, and your knee-jerk reaction is because it's something that goes against what you believe. Don't have a knee-jerk reaction and reject it and throw it away. Paul said to test all things. Look at it. Examine it. Take it back to Scripture. That's what I tell everybody all the time. Go look. Go see what I'm saying. Go look in the Scriptures. I'll point you in the direction to go search it out. Hold fast to that which is good. Test it first. You'll never learn. You'll never grow if you can't accept something and then go test it. If you have a hard heart and reject it. But I'll end with that. And I'll ask one more time. Do you suffer from a blind heart? And remember, Ephesians 4:18, that blind heart alienates you from the Most High. All right, with that said, don't forget to vote Nehemiah, Amos. And with that, I'll say Shabbat Shalom. And like I end every video I do, don't just read this thing, but chew on it. Shalom, shalom, folks.